Hey guys, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning, here tonight to chat about this new Fontaines D.C. album, A Hero's Death. Fontaines D.C. are Dublin, Ireland-based post-punkers. They have been a very fresh face in the genre since their emergence a few years ago. Now, a little over a year ago, they dropped their Doggerel debut album. This was an album that, from a distance, worried me, a little bit at least, because the hype going into this album and the amount of people that were hyping this up was pretty astronomical. So much so, I worried that the album wasn't going to live up to its hype. However, I was wrong. Doggerel harnessed the energy of punks past and present. They created this album that was a throwback at times and oddly timeless as well, but was also thought-provoking and shockingly very thought-provoking as well. Not only was it punk album of the year, not only was it rock album of the year, this was my runner-up for album of the year last year. Now, I was certainly not expected to hear from him this soon, yet I've been really enjoying a lot of the singles leading up to this album. Let's chat about this thing. This album starts off with I Don't Belong, and it is a very telling, intense intro. This track here plays along with an element that I really wanted them to expand on listening to their debut album, and that was the more tragic side, the more emotionally bleak nature to their music. Now, Fontaines are always very focused, and they are always very slick sounding. This track is no different. But here, that very tragic underbelly shows its face, and it is brilliant. It's somber, it's very dreary, but it also has this intensity, even though it's not the most in-your-face track. No, it's got that very pensive post-punk energy, though, in a big way. It's also expertly written and very poignant and right on time. Much like their debut album, this track is great. On the other hand, I needed a track like Love Is the Main Thing early on in this album to really amp me up. It's a much more wilder track. It brings in that intensity. But once again, there is a bleakness to this track that I would be a fool to ignore. Now, around the release of Doggerel, I know a lot of people were kind of pointing fingers at the post-punk label on this album. I thought it was a post-punk album, but a lot of people kind of argued that. But with tracks like this showing up on this album, it's not really an argument anymore. This band can do so much with so little. That's what excites me about these guys. And between those distant squealing guitars and these overly commanding performances, this is great. Fontaines D.C. are on one of rock's greatest roles right now. Well, I was worried going into this album, hearing a track like Televised Mind going into it. Man, this really eased some of my nerves. It is the bleakest and the densest track here. These are all things I truly love in the world of post-punk. The tragic, dreary nature of this album continues in a big way, but Fontaines, you continue to make it sound so fresh. They still seemingly have so much to say. After seemingly being the punk band with the most to say last year, it's very exciting. On the other hand, A Lucid Dream, while still very intense, very hypnotic, may just be the easiest to digest track here. As a matter of fact, if you're new to their music, give a track like this a listen. The sonic production here and the layers of sound is fantastic. Not only that, but like I said a couple of times now, this has been a very bleak album, but the very soaring vocal performance on this one honestly breaks things up just a little, even though lyrically it is still just as tragic. So much so, by the time that we get to this very intense whispered passage, by the end of this track, it's pretty refreshing actually. For a deep cut, this is one of the most strongest performances here. Now, overall, this is another knockout of an album. However, I will say this as a small critique, they really have to watch some of these softer tunes, like my least favorite track here, You Said. This one's a big letdown for me. It's odd. So far, this has been a very morbid album. This is the first track that in that vein really doesn't come off that good sounding. It's just a little too sappy for me. Fontaines, for a couple of minutes, just come off too toothless as far as I'm concerned. Not to mention, this instrumental, which is on the softer side, is just a little too soft for my liking. You certainly have to watch tracks like this. I have a lot of the same feelings towards Sunny as well. Once again, this is another rainy day, dreary ballad. It's a shame because I actually really love the very dreary, hazy atmosphere on this track. Also, some of the group vocals are pretty interesting. I'd like to hear more of that. But once again, there's a little too sappy for me. There's just not nearly as much teeth here. Not only that, but of every other track here, this one seems to drag so much. But the rest of this album is just another knockout. They really have this tragic sound down to a T, and they knock it out of the park. Oh, such a spring in a sea of bleak tracks. This may just be the bleakest. This one is so unbelievably full of sorrow. And like I said, some of these lighter, more stripped down tunes are where Fontaines need to watch themselves. But for a much more intimate and harrowing track, this is great. Also, something about this instrumental here actually takes me back to a simpler time in these genres. And keeping it short and sweet at 2 minutes and 40 seconds was a stroke of genius. The title track, A Hero's Death, is one of the most punchiest and well thought out tracks here. This is an ingenious single, honestly, because it's just so catchy and easy to get caught up in, all the while staying just as intense and repetitive, and honestly really summing up almost every theme of this album very well. But by the end of this track, it's actually taking some pretty big risks, some I'd like to hear some more of. This is great. I love the intensity and the energy on Living in America. This track is so commanding. I love the vocals on here, with them just sounding like they're coming from inside your head. I love that in post-punk. Alongside the rest of the band's energy as well, it just adds for a really fresh sound. It's super telling, it's very immediate, and once again, right on time. We needed this right now. It's also so murky on the inside, so grisly. I Was Not Born, on the other hand, kind of has a late 80s, early 90s underground rock vibe to it. It's something they've kind of touched down on in the past, but they do it really well. It is punchy and catchy enough to really stick with you, though. It's strangely triumphant as well. Not only that, these guys are so sharp at writing these big, catchy hooks with so much to say. These are the voices in punk that we need right now. And No, as a finale, is actually really great as well. It is, once again, on the more emotional, softer side of things. But this track is so real, painfully real. I mean, yes, this could have been a little bit heavier or like more intense, but honestly, for a softer sound from Fontaines D.C, this is the way to go. And these vocals are some of the most passionate here. This is a great album. So I'm going to come out and say it. I think that Fontaines D.C are on one of the best rolls in punk rock right now. Honestly, this may not be as catchy or as immediate as their debut album Doggerel, but for a much more tragic, darker album that you really need to sit with a little bit more, this is actually pretty stunning. Once again, these guys are one of the freshest acts in post-punk right now. I mean, the only thing I have to say is some of the more softer tunes on here are a little disheartening, and that's something that they need to watch out for. But overall, this is another knockout. I'm feeling a strong 8 on this album, but let me know what you guys think down below. If you liked the video, be sure to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let me know down below what you would like for me to chat about in the future. And until next time, have a great day, guys.